Welcome to Mega Wellness Summit. I'm your host, Nikki Jencen. Now, the sheer volume of questions that I get on hormones is astronomical. Today, more and more couples are having trouble getting pregnant, sustaining a pregnancy, losing weight. They have crazy mood swings, suffering from depression, and so on. It's heartbreaking to hear. This is why our next topic is very important. It really pertains to everyone. It's one of the toughest, most confusing subjects in the wellness area, in my opinion. So thank goodness I have Dr. Daniel Pompa here today. Dr. Daniel Pompa is a chiropractor. He is raising 5 healthy children with his wife, Marilee. He has now devoted his life to helping people with chronic fatigue syndrome, autism, cellular detoxing, hormone dysregulation, autoimmunity, and the list goes on. Hey, welcome, Dr. Daniel Pompa. Thanks so much for being a part of our summit.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So how are you today? You're doing good?
I'm doing great.
I still can't believe you have 5 children.
I do. Sounds busy, doesn't it?
Sounds like hair pulling to me. I have 2 children, and I'm like, oh my gosh, gasping for air sometimes. I love my kids. Don't get me wrong. And what's their ages?
Let's see. We have 2 18-year-olds that are twins that we adopted.
Okay.
And then we have my 16-year-old, oldest biological boy, and then 14, another boy, and my 11-year-old, Simon, who is my handful, my energy, and he is definitely the one that keeps me young. So I only have one girl, and she's one of the twins, the 18-year-old.
Well, yeah, you definitely sound busy, but at least they're older now.
I don't know if that's good or bad. I think it just changes. I think the stressors just change. That's all.
That's very true.
Mm-hmm.
So, I get approached all the time on hormones. And it's something, now I deal with people, I'm a personal chef and I'm a holistic health coach, yes, and I mostly deal with people who are going gluten-free and want to lose weight. But hormones continuously pop up for a question for me. So I'm really excited that you're here chatting about hormones with me today because it really is something that needs to be clarified.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I mean, there's a lot of subjects here. And I think that one of the things, my message about hormones, I think it's 180 degrees opposite of kind of what's in vogue right now and what most people hear of as far as hormones goes.
What's up with our hormones? Why is this affecting everybody?
Well, there's a few things going on right now. I think like no time, in the history of man have we really been exposed to certain toxins. I mean, arguably in the turn of the century, the environment was more toxic, right? But today our environment's cleaner. But ultimately, the chemicals that are in our food supply, the chemicals that we're putting in our bodies, on our bodies, are much worse. And they're neurotoxins, so they're not your average toxins. So how does that affect hormones? Well, it does a lot of ways, but simply put, these toxins drive inflammation. And I know those people listening, you've heard that inflammation is the cause of, heart disease, diabetes, and, all these different conditions. We think of inflammation as a sore shoulder. But really, when they say that inflammation causes all these diseases, really they're talking about something called cellular inflammation. How does that affect your hormones? Because the hormone receptors, that's what the hormones that your body make, they have to attach to your cells. I mean, you have 50 trillion cells in your body, and the hormones have to make their way to the cell, and there's like little antennas that they attach to, and then they put their message into the cell, and then you feel normal. But what if they don't attach to the receptor, or the receptor is blunted or damaged? Now the hormone doesn't get its message in the cell and you don't feel well. So toxins interfere with that receptor, and that drives that inflammation around the cell membrane. Nikki, I think I have to give an example, because this is what's in vogue right now. Everybody is taking more hormones, and I think probably your listening audience is probably more familiar with bioidentical hormones. Would you agree that that's like a word that's pretty well known in your listening audience?
Yeah, well, they're all, their estrogen levels are all out of whack.
Yeah, so we can take bioidentical estrogen, progesterone, bioidentical, or you go to your regular doctor and he gives you estrogen or he gives you progesterone. Bioidentical just means it's a little more natural, matches your body better. So regardless of the hormone, whether it's a bioidentical hormone or a regular hormone, estrogen, testosterone, progesterone, we can go down the list. Even talk about insulin or thyroid hormone. These are all hormones. These are chemical messengers that's job is to tell your body, your cell to do something. And when it works, you feel great. Thyroid hormone is, working great. You have energy, you stay lean, you stay thin, right? If insulin's working well, glucose levels stay normal, energy stays normal. So it's really important. Well, today, because of this inflammation, which I believe driven mostly by certain toxins, which we could talk about, but what's happening is people are taking more hormones in any form, whether it's thyroid hormones, whether it's progesterone, estrogen, you name it. And it works in the beginning, oftentimes. Sometimes not, but most often I would say it works. The example is this. If we shout at our kids, and those of you who don't have kids, I promise I'll give you an analogy too. If you shout at them, they listen. I've got 5, so folks, I know this to be true. In the beginning, it works. They actually listen. They go, oh my gosh, Mom and Dad are serious, I'm going to listen. But if you keep shouting, they eventually start listening less. Matter of fact, eventually they don't even hear you at all. Right. So that's what's happening with hormones today. We're giving a lot of hormones. In the beginning, it works. You're shouting at the cell because the inflammation, you need the shout. It can't hear the hormones as well, so we shout louder. But eventually, giving more hormones actually blunts these hormone receptors more, and eventually you need more hormones, and eventually they don't work at all. So, now you're taking all these hormones and going, gosh, I just don't feel well. I can't lose weight. I still can't sleep through the night. And you're taking hormones wondering why it's not working. I guess for those who don't have kids, the analogy is this. If you run out of gas, obviously you have to get the gas in your tank. If you can't get your gas tank open for some odd reason and you just start dumping the gas on the outside of the car, is that really going to make your car run any better? Of course, the answer is no. You have to get the gas in the tank. That's what's happening. Our cells are inflamed. It's epidemic, driven mostly by toxins. The hormones aren't getting in the cell. This is why so many people don't feel well. So that's what's going on with hormones. I just opened up a lot.
Well, that makes perfect sense. And so for people who are on thyroid, because now it seems like everyone who I talk to has a thyroid condition, if you're taking thyroid, okay, will eventually the thyroid not work?
Well, here's what's happening. So, yeah, you're right. You're taking hormones, and then, of course, it starts to affect your body's own production. The old days of men taking testosterone, they thought it was wonderful and great, but the moment they stop, their body stops producing it when you're taking it. And then when they stop taking it, when it starts not working, then all of a sudden everything backfires and down spirals. Here's a great example right now. I think there's a diet in vogue, the HCG diet. I think people are very familiar with it. And look, it works, right? People can lose 30, 40 pounds. They cut their calories and they're not eating muscle, they're eating fat. But what happens is just like everything, you have to stop eventually taking the hormone because it starts not working the same. When you stop, everything hormonally starts spiraling down. Your body's now not producing its own growth hormone, and all the other hormones slow down. And people will not only gain their weight back, but now they're in this massive hormone dysregulation. So, that's often the story with all hormones. Now, look, there's a time and a place. If someone doesn't have a thyroid, of course they have to take thyroid hormone, and they can even be used as crutches. So I want everyone to hear me. I'm not against hormones as crutches, but my message is this. If you don't get to the reason why you need hormones, or the reason why your body's not producing enough, or the reason why they're not getting in their message into the cell because of inflammation, then you're going to be frustrated because you're going to be taking hormones. It may even make your blood work look better, and that's always the case, it seems, with thyroid, but yet you still don't feel well, and that's the message that I'm trying to get across. We can use them for crutches, but ultimately we have to go upstream and remove the cause, otherwise you're never going to feel well. It's estimated that 20, 25% of certain thyroid problems, like having a goiter, are simply iodine deficiencies. And when you see a goiter, you always think iodine deficiency. And, the thyroid starts to enlarge and inflame and, literally increase its receptors to thyroid. and it drives this response and really a reaction. And by giving, iodine, by the way, 3/4 of the population, depending on where you live especially, it's very severe iodine deficiencies, which not only drive thyroid problems, but drop in IQ, drives infertility, it drives other problems with hormones, estrogen. So, iodine is one of my top 5 nutrient deficiencies that we look at. But ultimately, again, I always say that if you don't fix the cell, you will never get well. I have what I teach to doctors and the public is my 5 R's of cellular healing. It's really a roadmap of how to fix the cell, because this is the problem. As you can see, I'm telling you that all these hormone problems, it's really the cell, this inflammation problem that we've heard so much about. It's cellular inflammation. If we don't fix the cell, we won't get well. You won't fix your hormone condition. So thyroid in particular, I look upstream, and typically it is a toxin because the thyroid, they call it the canary in the coal mine. It's very vascular, and so toxins are very, it's very sensitive to toxins. Just like the canary in the coal mine that was sensitive to toxins and died if there was certain toxins in the coal mine. So what happens is heavy metals, certain other chemicals, chlorine, fluoride, flame retardants, things that we're exposed to daily are really driving the thyroid epidemic. And I'll mention another one, and I just wrote an article about it. And anyone can go to my website, and I wrote a lot of articles on these topics, by the way. But it's glyphosate. Glyphosate is a chemical that's used. As a matter of fact, it's the most used and abundant herbicide, pesticide on the planet. It's familiar. You're probably familiar with it in Roundup. But it really is used, in every food if you're not eating 100% organic today, especially genetically modified foods. But look, this glyphosate is driving hormone problems, leaky gut. It's causing brain problems with the brain, and it's causing problems with thyroid and other hormones. So we are exposed to a lot of different toxins that, look, Nikki, when we grew up, we weren't exposed to these levels. And we're seeing a thyroid epidemic. We're seeing a hormone epidemic driven by these types of toxins.
I was talking to Stephanie Seneff, and she was just describing all the different sources that we're getting bombarded with glyphosate.
Yeah, I really respect, Stephanie Seneff. She's really led this crusade, I think more than anyone, and, just exposing, how much we're exposed to this. Any conventional grain is sprayed with this stuff now, and GMOs have 4 to 10 times the amount, and some of her studies and others have really shown how it's, causing so many problems. But, I think that, one of the things I talk about is, my cellular detox, and have a lot of different detox things out there that are in vogue, whether it's a foot bath, magnets, colon cleanses, liver cleanses. Not that there's anything wrong with those, but if we don't detox the cell, that's really where the magic is, because we have to be able to turn off certain genes that these toxins turn on. We have to get our cells working where it produces energy. So the reason we don't feel well, it's a cellular issue. That's why we have hormone problems. So people want to read. I wrote articles about this 5 R's and how we do cellular detox, and I teach doctors all around the country. About 60 doctors I've trained in this and around the country, and it's for a reason, because it's really the answer to, why people aren't getting well, even despite all of the medications and the supplements they're taking. You have to fix the cell. So you'll see me keep coming back to that. You know how I learned it, Nikki? I got very, very sick myself, and I ended up with an unexplainable illness, that had no answers. My thyroid wasn't working. My adrenals were shot. I had, major adrenal fatigue, and it seemed like every time I addressed either my thyroid or my adrenals, certain things might have get a little better, but then I wouldn't sleep as well, and then my anxiety went up, and, I would get panic attacks, and so I just wasn't upstream far enough. My blood work was always normal, which was very frustrating. But when I finally went upstream and I realized this is a fact a cellular problem, and more in particular with me, I had mercury that bioaccumulated in and around certain parts of my brain, the pituitary in particular, which runs your thyroid, which runs your adrenal glands. And when I got to my cause and removed it, I finally got my life back, but I suffered miserably for 4 years, I would say severely, where I, could barely work, and at that time I had 2 children. and I sure wasn't the dad that I had used to be, and I wasn't able to work very well either. So I spent most of my days just laying in bed because I didn't sleep all night. So that's my story, but that's how I learned, most of what I teach.
Well, that's a lot of people's story nowadays, unfortunately to say, but we are now of a sick community rather than a healthy one.
Yeah, I think that's a big problem. It's one of my messages that I'm constantly reminding doctors, even alternative doctors. It's not about giving more vitamins or minerals or nutrients necessarily, and although that's needed. But if you don't remove the cause, you're never going to get well. It's my R number one, remove the source.
Right.
If you don't remove the source, you will not get well. Look, I spent years researching, trying to get my life back. I spent everything on trying to fix my thyroid, trying to fix my adrenals, and, all the things. Yes, I had parasites. My candida never, ever went away. I would control it, I'd beat it back, but it would come back because my immune system was allowing these things. So I think a lot of
How did you know that you had candida?
Well, when you start to, have, itchy ears, itchy anus, skin problems, rashes, all these digestive issues, I became intolerant to every food. Of course, I couldn't eat gluten like, most people today. I had to take all grains out of my diet. It really became a big, big, big issue. Not being able to eat, bloating after meals. Like most people, I took every probiotic and all these things. And, it did help some, especially when I beat the candida back. But it wasn't until I got my heavy metal levels down to a certain point that my candida stayed down as well, because it has a weird synergy around the metals. It knocks the immune system back, and things like that are opportunistic. So you really have to go upstream. I feel like even alternative doctors are still too far downstream oftentimes, and we really need to do a good history. And we find these big things. How many of my thyroid cases have heavy metals, and how many of my fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue people, have mold, biotoxic illness, Lyme disease. These are big, big, big toxins that eventually shut down the detox pathway, and now every cell in the body starts malfunctioning. And again, we need some nutrients. We need these things, but ultimately we have to look for these sources and get rid of them. And that's how I got my life back.
How did you find the source?
Yeah.
I would think that would be very hard to do, is to swim through the muck to find what's the cause.
No, it is. I spent a lot of time training practitioners how to do a really good history, and as a detective, really, and looking for these things, whether it's running the right tests and just listening to the person. It takes a while to do that. But, I was researching, and I found something called Mad Hatter's disease, and you may or may not be familiar with it, but people were making felt hats, and they became known as the Mad Hatters because they literally were going crazy. They were mad as a hatter. Well, they used mercury to really knock down some of these molds and things that would live in the felt that they would use to make the hats. In using the mercury, they all started having certain set of symptoms and became known mad as a hatter. But I looked at these symptoms. I said, oh, my God, this is me. I'm mad as a hatter. The mistake I made was that I went and got a blood test because I thought, surely this is it. And my blood test was normal. And I found out later that a blood test for mercury poisoning would only be if you had acute poisoning, which I wasn't making felt hats every day, so that wasn't my issue. But I found out that at that point I made friends with a really bright endocrinologist, because I knew my thyroid wasn't right and my adrenals. And he said to me one day, Dan, I think you have mercury poisoning. I said, no, I thought so too. A year ago I thought I ran a blood test. He said, wrong test. Do a challenge test. Do it this way. And I did. And sure enough, my mercury was off the charts. And by the way, I had done a hair analysis that showed 0 mercury too, because my body's detox pathways were shut down. So
what is the test called that you did again?
Yeah, it was a challenge test. So I took a chelating agent, and then I looked at what came out of my tissue. There's no perfect test, and there's many different ways, but there's a lot of tests that are bad. For example, hair tests, if you look at minerals, could give you a clue, but looking at just straight mercury or metals in the hair really it'll only show up if you're getting rid of it. And again, blood is only if you have an acute exposure, because it's only in the blood for a few days, then it bioaccumulates or moves out of your body.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to run the right test. But once I did and I saw that, of course, my question would have been the same as most people listening is, well, how did I get this? So
right.
this gentleman said, did you have any dental work done around the time
mm-hmm.
that you got sick? And I said, yeah, I had this gold filling put in, and a good friend of mine did it. I'll call him and see how it correlates, because I was cycling at the time, so I knew exactly when my symptoms started. And it started with some digestive issues, then fatigue, and then insomnia. And then I called, and sure enough, it was 2 days after I had 2 silver amalgam fillings drilled out, which contain 50% mercury. The way I learned later causes galvanism, which is an electrical current that causes the mercury from the other fillings just to pour out, 10 times faster than normal. And that's when my symptoms started. So
he
of course,
didn't
I started
safely
researching
remove
the
the
right way to
amalgam.
get the rest of them out. So those listening, please don't just go and drill on fillings or take them out. I've developed a process for that so you don't get more sick, because you can vaporize that mercury, which goes right into the brain. And by the way, that's what happens. If you look at different studies, one that was in FASB, one of the most prestigious scientific journals, the number of fillings in your head, folks, is proportional to how much mercury you have in your brain. In particular, the pituitary hypothalamus. And again, that's what runs your thyroid and your adrenals. So when I was sick, I narrowed it down to there's something wrong with this control tower for my endocrine system in my brain. So no wonder I couldn't, get my hormones right. And the duress study is a great study. That moms out there listening, the number of fillings, silver fillings, amalgam fillings in your mouth is proportional to how much mercury is in your baby's brain. In utero, it starts that process. So, there's disturbing studies that the World Health Organization said, hey, look, these fillings aren't meant to be in humans. I always say don't insult our intelligence, because before they go in your mouth, these silver fillings, they're considered hazardous waste. The moment they go in your mouth, they're considered safe. The moment they come out and hit the dental tray, they're considered hazardous waste again. So don't insult our intelligence. These things are toxic.
Yeah.
Only a biological dentist you should go to remove them. There's a safe process that we do before, during, and then if you don't, this is another big pitfall. If you don't start the proper metal detox after the last one comes out, eventually you start to develop new symptoms because the metal kind of starts mobilizing. I wrote 3 articles on my website that I urge everybody to read, and it's called When Detox is Dangerous. So if you go to my website, my last name, Pompa, Pompa.com, and you go under articles, you'll find that. You can put it in the search. So When Detox Becomes
I'll have the link for people.
Yeah, so that I urge people, because I don't want people to make the mistake. I talk about a lot of pitfalls, in this detoxing metals. I think even in the alternative world, it's where most people make big, big mistakes. So please read the articles.
And that's funny, because everybody is up on detoxing. Everybody wants to detox and then go right back to the way that they were living before.
Yeah, big
and
mistake.
That's just ridiculous in my book.
Absolutely, but again, there has to be right. You can't detox metals the way you do glyphosate, or there's obviously specific, or biotoxins. Someone that's in a mold situation, they're going to detox them differently. I talk about true cellular detox on my website, and what that really means, and you'll see that that's kind of the core of what we do. We get the cell moving things out and how to keep it going out of the body. But if you're dealing with heavy metals, it's different than biotoxins. So, you really, that's why I'm training doctors. You really need someone who understands, that. But yeah, you should detox. But again, you're right in what you said, Nikki. People do these 10-day detox things, and they think that that's the answer, and they do it a couple times a year, and they call that health or detox. When then they go right back to consuming massive amounts of sugar and toxins in the food they're eating, So or they still have silver fillings in their mouth, just pouring mercury right into their brain. Don't think that there's much that's going to help them.
And all of this is affecting our hormones.
And that's the point, right? 2 ways I just brought up, right? Directly, because of the pituitary that sits in the brain, and these toxins get right in there. and we're downstream fooling around with the adrenals and the thyroid, and then obviously the cell. These toxins make their way to that cell membrane, inflame it, and block the antennas to the hormones, block the receptors. Hormone problems it's a cellular problem. So it's not about taking more hormones. It's about the receptor to the hormone. And I always say this, weight loss, or what I call weight loss resistance, the inability to lose weight despite what you eat and even how much you exercise, this is a hormone problem. This is a cellular problem. So that's it. I call it cellular weight loss. You've got to fix the receptors to these hormones. You've got to go upstream and really ask the question why the hormones are dysfunctioning.
And that could be a process as well, and you really want to work with somebody who knows what they're doing, because to do this on your own would be hard.
No, it is hard. Look, you read the articles, my 5 R's. R number 2 is regenerating the cell membrane. We know now today the cell membrane is critical to moving the good stuff in that your cell needs to make energy and so you feel good, but also moving the toxins out. So, how many people, when they think of detox, think of, I got to fix my cell membrane? Well, there's specific ways to fix the cell membrane. We target certain ratios of fat. And by the way, many of your listeners are probably loading up on fish oil. Well, they do this because, number one, they say it's good. I want to ask the question, who is they? And then
Dr.
I believe that fish oil can be good. But the problem is that they end up taking fish oil, and they put themselves in omega-3 dominance. So they go beyond what's normal, and they actually are too high in omega-3, which causes that membrane to be too fluid, and it actually works against you. So, it works. You feel better in the beginning, then all of a sudden you're not feeling better. Because, see, in nature, fish oil's in a fish where there's other amazing fats, and there's a balance of other fats and saturated fats and, cholesterols and these things that balance out the omega-3. So, when we take it and put it in a pill, number one, we can oxidize it and, make a good fat bad, but also we can throw ourselves out of balance. So it's not as easy as people think, Nikki. Obviously we have an epidemic of cellular inflammation, and therefore an epidemic of people whose hormones aren't getting the messages in the cells. So, therefore it's throwing hormones into chaos. Hormone havoc is what I call it. So if we don't fix the cell, we won't fix the hormones, we won't get well. But, I give an analogy of a 3-legged stool. So if you think about what a 3-legged stool is, and, you need 3 legs for the stool to stand up, right? Take one leg away, it falls over. Well, I utilize that as an analogy in autoimmune, because autoimmune, I think, is a massive epidemic. Most people aren't diagnosed, but most people have it. If you would imagine with me, one leg at a time, one leg of the stool, your DNA. Certain genes can get turned on. So in the old days, we used to think, your mother had diabetes, you're going to get it too. And, of course, if you did, then it was, unlucky you. You got the bad gene. Well, we know that's not true today. We know that these genes get triggered, turned on. Well, what triggers them? Stressors. Pregnancy as a stressor can turn on a gene. Toxins are the number one stressor that turn on genes. We can turn on obesity genes by toxins, right? So, again, we're back to the toxins. So that's, one leg of the stool are these genes. My 5 R's of how you fix a cell, a lot of that is about turning off these bad genes. So when you have these thyroid conditions, part of fixing these, or the solution is to turn off these bad genes that have been turned on. And if you don't turn them off, you're never going to fix the condition. The other leg of the stool are the toxins, or the stressors, I should say, that turn on the genes. Once again, we have to go upstream, remove the stressors, and then the genes can be turned off if we're giving certain nutrients that do, we know, studies show turn off those genes. The last leg of the stool is the gut. It's an epidemic, and I know you probably had people on your summit here that talked about it, but most Americans have leaky gut today. Imagine holes in a pipe, of your gut where undigested proteins are going through, driving your antibodies and your immune system to attack itself, driving inflammation, which we've told you about. So this leaky gut, because of toxins, and Stephanie, I'm sure, talked about how glyphosate, that chemical, causes much of this leaky gut. These proteins cross, they drive the inflammation in the immune system, and this is driving a lot of the problems that we're seeing. So that 3-legged stool, you have to fix the gut. You have to get rid of the stressors, and you have to change the DNA. So think about your your healing. Think about your solution in that. You have to find, a doctor who understands epigenetics, changing gene expression, understands you have to remove the stressors, and understands how to fix leaky gut. So hopefully that helps your listeners as a visual, anyway, of the process that we have to go through.
Yeah, it's a lot. It is not just an easy fix. I can see kind of maybe why doctors just want to fix the symptom because they won't have enough time for testing all of this. I mean, is that kind of where this started?
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt. I mean, you think about allopathic, Western medicine, if you will. I mean, it's set up to what? I mean, they come in and doctors have time for what? I mean, they don't even have time to take the history anymore, right? So the nurse comes in and gets the history. The doctor, before he gets in the room, looks at the symptoms, and he says, "Oh, these symptoms, this concoction, this medication." Alternative medicine, I'm being one, I feel I can criticize us a little bit. We're falling into the same trap. Would you agree? Then with symptoms, and then we just start loading them up on different herbs, different things for the symptoms, never asking why. What's upstream? And that's where true cellular detox comes in. I mean, that's where educating people about lifestyle changes, and I think your summit's doing a fantastic job of that, and really hitting that is like, look, we have to change our life. You better change the food you're putting in your body. If you're still eating conventional grain, you're getting loads of glyphosate. I
want to hit on a couple of other things, too. So endometriosis and fibroids and women who have heavy periods, this is becoming the new epidemic of this century, at least. And I feel like, Dan, that's all hormonal. But where is this stemming from, and how do we fix this? How can we tell somebody today that is suffering from endometriosis, having a hard time even getting pregnant, where do they start?
Well, that's a great question. I love, as far as hormone testing goes, I love a 24-hour urine collection where we collect the urine for 24 hours. I think Suzanne Summers made that test the most popular. Let's give her credit where credit's due. And she talks about that being the test that saves her life. And my wife, I think that test saved her life as well. And it's a whole other story, but my wife had those things going on. And it was that test that revealed to me that, number one, her methylation, and again, I don't want to throw a big word out there that people don't understand, but methylation is a process, something that your body does to get rid of toxic hormones, protect your DNA, even help the cell detox. So there's many, many, many things that this methylation process does, but one of which is get rid of toxic hormones. And my wife's methylation was depleted, and it ended up being because she had very, very high lead levels, and it was just sucking her methylation down. So any stress, by the way, can deplete these methyl groups in your body that you need even to turn on stress hormones like adrenaline, cortisol. So when people get depleted, they get stressed out. They don't sleep as well. They have anxiety disorders. I had that as well. And what happens is when these methylation groups start dropping, now you don't get rid of toxic estrogen, and it builds up. So we looked at my wife's test, and she had methylation that didn't show up on the test, and the test looks at that. And also her toxic estrogens were in the danger zone. Now her mother ended up with breast cancer, went conventional, didn't do anything about the cause. 10 years later, of course, endometrial cancer. She ended up dying 2 years later of that. The story here goes, my wife was really going to end up, just like her. And thank God that, we saw that on the test, and we were able to start immediately supporting her methylation pathways and started, balancing her estrogens that way. But more importantly, we did go upstream and realize that it was her lead levels that were depleting the methyl groups. So, that's a story that I see played out all the time. So the 24-hour hormone test really gives us a very accurate assessment of the whole hormone pathway instead of just one spot shot. And there's, saliva hormone test can be useful. Even a blood test can be useful, but I think that in light of other tests, it makes more sense. But the urine test, I think, is a really good place to start.
I had a client who had cervical cancer, and that ran in the family. And this is a 27-year-old woman who was facing the fact that the doctors want to remove reproductive organs.
Right.
And they wanted to just do a hysterectomy right away because of the history, essentially, and because they found, some cancer cells. So she just said, well, this is my path. I have been told that I'm going to get cancer. It runs in my family. And I told her that it doesn't have to be her destiny, and that doesn't have to be her fate. And to have a doctor say, well, I'm sorry, at 27, 28 years old, we're going to take all your reproductive organs, you're never going to have a baby, was heartbreaking to hear. She didn't even have a boyfriend. This is just going to be out of the question for the rest of her life. Like, she had no chance.
Yeah, you know how many times that story gets played out today, and it's I can't tell you how many clients I have that have that same story. My wife actually was a grade 3, and they basically said that they did a colposcopy on her. They looked at the cells and said, "Oh, you're pre-cancer, if not cancer already." Mm-hmm. And of course, they made their recommendations, and of course, I educated myself further, and of course, I didn't go that route. Well, fast forward. My wife's fine today, no parts removed, obviously looked upstream, got to the cause, and my wife has normal hormones today. But let me tell you, it was a journey. Right. It was, in fact, a journey. But I can tell you, just like myself, she wouldn't be where she is. I mean, I could have thrown a lot of different hormones at her and even made her feel better. But ultimately, if I didn't get to her lead issue, which, by the way, was her mother's issue, too, and the number one source of lead is your mom. You get it in utero. It's just from mom. When women are pregnant, out comes the lead because most of it's stored in the bone, and we all grew up in the lead generation. Mm-hmm. So we're loaded, but it's stored in the bone, and during pregnancy it's released. That's why a lot of clients I have who say, this all started after pregnancy. First thing I want to look at is their heavy metal, because typically lead can drive those hormone problems. So really that was her upstream cause, is that she released a ton of lead. Every pregnancy, certain things started happening, and then sure enough, we looked at her heavy metal result, and she was ridiculously off the shelf. My wife literally, on a test, it was a 110, where under 2 is normal. Now, at that time, under 5 was normal, but it shows you the massive amount that she had. She was getting up just like her mother. So,
wow.
Yeah, I mean, my stories, I should say, is why I do get passionate about these topics, obviously. And that story, if you want to know more about that, it's our number 5 article. So if you go to my 5 articles, that's R5, and you can see that test and how I tell more about those details there.
And do you deal with PCOS?
Yeah, again, I think that 24-hour hormone test is a good way to assess that, because, it's not just saying, women with high testosterone levels. It could be toxic testosterone levels. And, again, when you look at that test, you kind of see how the hormones are cascading, how the hormones are what they're turning into. Well, it's not a matter of just testosterone. They may be, something called progesterone steal, where they're taking one hormone and bringing it over, and now it's forming toxic testosterone. And then there's something we can do, there's crutches we can give in the meantime to ward that off while we're working upstream, which is, again, very important, because those type of toxic hormones, they need to be dealt with. Remember, I said there's a time for crutches. That would be one.
Well, that sounds good. I think that this is getting a lot clearer, not only for myself, for a lot of people as well that are listening. And I know that hormones can be a very foggy topic, and I appreciate you really clearing the cobwebs of the subject. And I know that a lot of people might feel a bit overwhelmed by where they have to start. So we'll send them to your website, which is drpompa.com. Mm-hmm. You can start there. And then if they have questions, because I know that people are going to need some sort of a direction, and a doctor who can do this testing.
I do have doctors trained around the country. So if they get on my website, they email me, then, I'm usually the one that connects them with certain doctors, because I have certain doctors that are experts in certain areas. So I like to try to line them up with the right person.
That makes me feel so much better. And I know that somebody who just went, okay, thank you, God. I feel so much better. Now, and they can also connect with you on Facebook and Twitter. So your Facebook is Pompa Wellness. That's Pompa Wellness. And Twitter is Dr. Dan Pompa. So DrDanPompa. So I encourage all of you to go and visit Dr. Daniel Pompa at his website. That's drpompa.com. And also check out Dr. Pompa's ebook, the Cellular Healing Diet ebook. And you're going to get a lot of tools on weight loss and detoxing and hormones, and it's all there. So I really encourage you to go out, connect with Dr. Pompa, like his Facebook page, go to his website, get the book. There's so much information out there. And thank you again, Dr. Pompa, for speaking to me and being a part of the summit. I can't thank you enough. I'm truly grateful.
You're welcome, Nikki. Absolutely. Spreading the word.